Welcome to my channel. Here, we share inspiring stories of brave and strong people. Maybe you'll see yourself or someone you know in these stories. Thank you for watching. They thought it would be simple, a quick kidnapping, to force Clara Morgan to hand over what they needed. They underestimated everything. The sleepy town of Cedarvale wasn't as quiet as it seemed. And the pet they'd spotted during surveillance wasn't just a family dog. Hunter had a past few could rival, a decorated military canine, with a record of 57 confirmed neutralizations. He had been trained for battle. And the cartel had no idea the storm they'd unleashed. As Lila and Clara raced against time to escape, Hunter was the only thing standing between them and the predators closing in. But would his training be enough? Leave a comment and let us know where you're tuning in from. If you enjoy stories like this, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next inspiring journey tomorrow. The last bell at Cedarvale Middle School rang sharply, echoing across the quiet streets of the small Arizona town. Clara Morgan slung her backpack over her shoulder and made her way toward the waiting bus. Her sneakers crunched on the gravel path, but her steps slowed as she noticed them again, two black SUVs parked just beyond the school's entrance, their tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. She felt the weight of their presence, and the unease that had been lingering for days pressed heavier against her chest. She glanced over her shoulder. Two men, dressed in dark suits, leaned against the vehicles, their eyes fixed in her direction. Lila quickened her pace. Her father had once told her to always trust her instincts. And right now, they screamed at her to get out of sight. Back at home, the tension didn't ease. Lila stepped onto the front porch, where Hunter, her family's Belgian Malinois, was already pacing the perimeter. His sharp amber eyes darted toward the edge of their property. His ears pricked and his body tense. A low growl rumbled from his chest as he caught sight of something, or someone, beyond the fence. "Hey, boy," Lila said softly, crouching to pat his head. Hunter didn't respond. His gaze was locked on the treeline, every muscle in his body ready for action. Inside, Clara Morgan sat at the kitchen table, her hands resting on the frayed edges of a weathered envelope. It had sat untouched for 2 years. Ever since Ethan, her son, Lila's father, had handed it to her before his final mission. She had avoided opening it for fear of what it might contain. But the sight of Lila's anxious face and Hunter's growling at the window left her with no choice. Something was wrong. Ethan's foresight had never failed her before, and she wasn't about to ignore it now. Clara's fingers trembled as she tore the envelope open. Inside was a single piece of paper, its edges worn but the handwriting bold and clear. "Clara," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it back. I knew this day might come, which is why I left this plan in place. The cartel won't stop looking for what I found, and they'll come for Lila. But I've made preparations to keep her safe. Enclosed are the coordinates for Safe House Alpha. Hunter has been trained to lead you there. Trust him. And trust yourself. This plan will protect her, but only if you act quickly." Clara's breath caught as her eyes darted to the numbers scrawled below the message, coordinates to a location deep in the desert. Ethan's handwriting was firm, as if even in death, he refused to leave room for hesitation. A sharp bark from Hunter snapped her out of her thoughts. She looked up to see the dog pressed against the living room window, his growl rising in volume. Clara followed his gaze. A black SUV was parked just down the road, barely visible through the dust-kissed trees. "Lila," Clara called, her voice steady despite the tension clawing at her. Lila appeared in the doorway, her face pale. "Go to your room. Pack a bag. Now." "What's going on?" Lila asked. though the fear in her voice suggested she already knew. No time to explain. Just do it. Lila hesitated for only a moment before running upstairs. Clara folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. She moved quickly to the locked cabinet in the corner of the kitchen, her hands steady as she retrieved Ethan's old service pistol. The weight of it in her hands was both familiar and foreign, a reminder of the years she had spent learning to defend herself when Ethan insisted it was necessary. As she loaded the weapon, her mind drifted to the last conversation she had with Ethan. "They'll come for her, Mom," he'd said, his voice low but resolute. "I've done everything I can to prepare you. But when the time comes, you have to act. Don't hesitate." "Why does it have to be this way?" she'd asked him, her voice shaking with the weight of a mother's grief. "Because if I don't do this, they'll never stop. Lila deserves to live her life without looking over her shoulder." His words rang in her ears now as the sound of crunching gravel outside pulled her back to the present. Clara peered through the curtains. A second SUV had joined the first, and two men were stepping out, their movements deliberate and predatory. Hunter's growl deepened. His body pressed against the door. Clara knelt beside him, resting a hand on his sleek coat. "You're ready for this, aren't you, boy?" she whispered. Hunter didn't take his eyes off the approaching men. Clara felt a surge of gratitude toward Ethan for leaving them with this fierce protector. He wasn't just a dog, he was a soldier, trained for moments like this. "Mom!" Lila's voice called from the stairs. Clara turned to see her standing there, a small backpack slung over her shoulder and fear etched across her face. "What's happening?" "They're here," Clara said simply. "But we're ready." Hunter barked sharply, as if to confirm her words. The sound of car doors slamming shut echoed through the stillness of the evening, and Clara felt her pulse quicken. Ethan's plan was now in motion. There was no turning back. As the men approached the house, Clara steeled herself. She placed a hand on Lila's shoulder and looked her in the eyes. "Stay close to Hunter. He'll keep you safe." "What about you?" Lila whispered. "I'll be right behind you," Clara promised. "Now go." Lila hesitated for only a moment before stepping toward the hidden escape hatch in the floor, which Ethan had built years ago. Hunter followed her, his body tense but controlled, his every movement a testament to his training. Clara watched them disappear into the shadows below before turning her attention to the front door. She raised the pistol, her jaw set with the determination of a mother who would do anything to protect her family. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel, it means so much to us. Now, let's get back to the story. The front door rattled violently as the cartel's men attempted to force their way in. Clara crouched by the kitchen window, her grip firm on Ethan's old service pistol. She watched two shadows move along the perimeter of the house while another man worked at the lock. Her breathing was steady, her mind focused. Ethan's words replayed in her head, "Don't hesitate. Act fast." Hunter stood by the door, his growl low and threatening, his body coiled like a spring. Clara knew the dog was ready to strike, but she needed to time it perfectly. The sound of splintering wood filled the room as the lock finally gave way, and the door swung open. The first man stepped inside cautiously, his weapon drawn. He barely had time to register the blur of fur and muscle that lunged at him. Hunter moved with precision, clamping down on the man's wrist and forcing him to drop his gun. The intruder let out a yell of pain as Hunter dragged him to the ground, his powerful jaws locked tightly. "Good boy," Clara muttered under her breath, her focus shifting to the second man, who was now circling toward the side window. She raised her pistol and fired a warning shot, the sound echoing through the house. The man ducked behind cover, buying her a few precious seconds. Lila. Now! Clara shouted. Lila emerged from the hallway, clutching her backpack. Her face was pale, but her steps were steady as she followed Clara's command. Clara pulled open a trapdoor hidden beneath the rug in the living room, revealing a narrow tunnel that descended into darkness. "What about you?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "I'll hold them off," Clara said firmly, her eyes locking onto her granddaughters. "Hunter will take care of you. Just follow the instructions." Hunter released his grip on the first intruder, who scrambled out the door clutching his injured arm. The dog immediately moved to Lila's side, his stance protective as he nudged her toward the escape tunnel. Clara handed Lila a flashlight and the folded map from Ethan's letter. "You know what to do. Trust Hunter." Lila hesitated, her eyes filling with fear. But she nodded and disappeared into the tunnel, with Hunter following close behind. Clara closed the hatch and repositioned the rug, erasing any sign of their escape. The men outside regrouped quickly, their frustration evident as they shouted orders to each other. Clara fired another warning shot through the window, forcing them to keep their distance. She knew she couldn't hold them off forever, but she only needed to buy enough time for Lila and Hunter to get a head start. One of the men threw a heavy object through the window, shattering the glass. Clara ducked behind the couch as shards rained down around her. She fired a third shot, hitting the edge of the doorframe, and heard them curse as they retreated. Her breathing was heavy, but her resolve didn't waver. She glanced at the old clock on the wall. 5 minutes. That was all she needed to give them. Meanwhile, in the tunnel, Lila's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the narrow, dirt-lined passageway. The air was damp and heavy, and the sound of her own breathing echoed off the walls. Hunter walked ahead of her, his movements deliberate and confident as if he knew exactly where they were going. Lila clutched the map tightly, her mind racing back to the times Ethan had taught her how to navigate. She remembered the summer afternoons spent in their backyard, where he'd set up obstacle courses and given her mock missions. "Always look for landmarks," Ethan had said, handing her a compass. "And trust your instincts. If you stay calm, you'll always find your way." Those lessons felt distant now, like they belonged to another life. But as she followed the tunnel's twists and turns, she realized how much she had learned. She glanced at Hunter, who paused at an intersection, his ears twitching. "Left," she whispered, consulting the map. Hunter seemed to understand, moving in the indicated direction without hesitation. Above ground, Clara's luck was running out. The men had stopped retreating and were now advancing on the house with renewed determination. She took a deep breath, her hands tightening around the pistol. A loud bang echoed through the house as one of them kicked in the back door. Clara fired her last warning shot, narrowly missing the intruder's shoulder. The man ducked, but his partner pressed forward, shouting for her to surrender. Clara backed toward the kitchen, her mind racing. She had done her part. Now it was up to Lila and Hunter. After what felt like an eternity, Lila saw a faint light at the end of the tunnel. Her heart raced as she quickened her pace, her legs aching from the long trek. Hunter barked softly, his tail wagging as if to reassure her they were close. The tunnel opened into a small, reinforced bunker, its walls lined with shelves filled with supplies. A single desk stood in the center of the room, with a file folder and a hard drive sitting on top. Lila approached the desk cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the words scrawled on the folder's cover, "Alpha Cache." She opened the folder, her hands shaking as she sifted through the contents. Photographs, financial records, and encrypted documents filled the pages. Her eyes widened as she recognized some of the faces in the photos, men in suits shaking hands with known cartel leaders. "This is what they're after," she murmured. Hunter barked again, drawing her attention to the entrance. The sound of distant footsteps echoed through the tunnel. The cartel was still on their trail. Victor Kane stood near the ruined Morgan home, his sharp eyes scanning the wreckage. He had underestimated the family's ability to escape, and that irritated him. His men had reported the existence of a hidden tunnel, but they had yet to determine where it led. "Find them," Victor ordered coldly. "They won't get far." One of his men approached cautiously. "That dog. It's trained. Military grade. This isn't a normal family." "Sir." Victor's lips curled into a sneer. "It's a dog," he said dismissively. "And dogs can be dealt with. Focus on the girl and the evidence." He turned toward the horizon, his mind already calculating their next move. He didn't realize how wrong he was about Hunter, not yet. Back in the bunker, Lila tucked the folder and hard drive into her backpack. She glanced at Hunter, who was standing guard near the entrance, his body tense and ready. "We have to move," she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her. Hunter barked in agreement, and together, they prepared to continue their escape. The dense wilderness surrounding Cedarvale was a maze of jagged rocks and towering trees. Lila adjusted the straps of her backpack, her breath coming in quick bursts as she followed Hunter's lead. The Belgian Malinois moved with precision, his nose to the ground and ears twitching at every sound. Clara trailed a few steps behind, keeping an eye on the trail for any sign of pursuit. "Stay close," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. She clutched the pistol tightly, her knuckles pale from the grip. The distant sound of rustling leaves and snapping branches reminded her they were being hunted. Lila glanced down at the map in her hand, the instructions scrawled by Ethan guiding her toward the next waypoint. "We're close," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hunter paused at a fork in the trail, his body stiffening as he sniffed the air. He let out a low growl and turned sharply to the right, signaling the correct path. A faint clicking sound caught Clara's attention, and she raised her hand to stop Lila. "Wait," she said, stepping forward cautiously. Hunter had already stopped, his sharp eyes fixed on a thin wire stretched across the ground. "Tripwire," Clara muttered, kneeling to examine it. It was attached to a small, crude explosive, likely set up by the cartel to catch them off guard. "Hunter. Good boy," she said, giving the dog a quick pat on the head. She carefully disarmed the trap, her years of training as a military nurse coming back to her in an instant. "Why would they set this up here?" Lila asked, her voice trembling. "They're trying to box us in," Clara replied, standing. "They know we're heading somewhere, but they don't know where. We have to keep moving." Hunter barked softly, urging them forward. The trail narrowed, forcing them to move single file as the forest closed in around them. The sound of footsteps in the distance grew louder, and Clara's heart raced. They didn't have much time. After what felt like hours, the terrain began to level out. Ahead, the faint outline of a small cabin emerged through the trees. It was hidden among the thick foliage, its weathered exterior blending seamlessly with the environment. Hunter quickened his pace, leading them to the door. Clara pushed it open cautiously, her pistol raised. The inside was sparse, with only a table, a few chairs, and a large metal safe built into the floor. Lila immediately set to work, pulling the map and Ethan's letter from her backpack. "This is it," Lila said, unfolding the letter. "The second cache." Clara nodded, her eyes scanning the room. Start opening it. I'll keep watch. Lila knelt beside the safe, entering the code Ethan had written in the letter. The lock clicked open, revealing a stack of files, a hard drive, and several USB sticks. She picked up one of the files, her eyes widening as she flipped through the pages. Photographs of high-ranking officials shaking hands with cartel leaders, bank statements detailing massive transfers, and encrypted emails filled the folder. This is huge, Lila said, her voice shaking. It's not just the cartel. There are people in the government working with them. Clara glanced over her shoulder, her expression grim. This is what your father wanted us to find. It's why they're after us. Hunter let out a sudden bark, his body tense as he stared out the window. Clara moved quickly to his side, peering through the cracks in the wooden shutters. The faint glint of a flashlight pierced through the trees, followed by the sound of voices. They're here, Clara said, her voice low. She turned to Lila. Pack everything. We're not staying. Lila shoved the files and hard drive into her backpack, her hands trembling. What about the evidence? If they catch us? They won't, Clara said firmly. We've made it this far, and we're not stopping now. Hunter barked again, louder this time. Clara motioned for Lila to move toward the back door. The cabin had another escape route, one Ethan had marked on the map. It led to a narrow ravine that would be difficult for the cartel to navigate. Go, Clara ordered. Lila hesitated for a moment before nodding, following Hunter as he led the way. Clara took one last look at the cabin, her grip tightening on the pistol. She knew the real fight was just beginning. Victor Kane stood at the edge of the forest, his eyes scanning the cabin through a pair of binoculars. His men had reported the family's location, but he was no longer underestimating them. The presence of traps along the trail and the precise movements of the dog had made one thing clear: this wasn't just a panicked escape. This family knows what they're doing, Victor said, lowering the binoculars. They've been trained. One of his men stepped forward, his expression uneasy. The dog, it's military. It's not like any animal I've ever seen. Victor smirked. Then it'll be a shame when we put it down. He turned to his men. Surround the cabin. No one leaves. Hunter paused at the entrance to the ravine, his ears swiveling as he listened for threats. Lila crouched beside him, her breathing uneven as she tried to steady herself. We can do this, she whispered, repeating Ethan's words to herself. Trust Hunter. Trust yourself. Clara caught up to them, her face flushed from the sprint. They're right behind us, she said. Hunter, lead the way. The dog didn't hesitate, bounding forward into the darkness. Lila followed, clutching the backpack tightly. Behind them, the sound of Victor's men closing in grew louder. The final confrontation was drawing near. Hunter moved swiftly through the ravine, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. Lila kept her focus on the path ahead, following Hunter's every move. Clara brought up the rear, her pistol held steady, eyes darting for any sign of movement. The night air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the stillness. The first gunshot rang out, ricocheting off the rocks nearby. Clara ducked instinctively, returning fire toward the shadows moving along the ridge. Keep moving, she shouted, her voice cutting through the darkness. Hunter barked sharply, guiding Lila through a narrow opening in the rocks. They emerged into a small clearing, where several tripwires were strung low between the trees. Hunter paused, glancing back at Clara as if waiting for the command to proceed. Go ahead, boy, Clara said, wiping sweat from her brow. "Ethan trained you for this." Hunter bounded forward, leading Lila safely through the web of wires. Behind them, Clara heard the crunch of footsteps and muffled curses. Victor's men were right on their trail, oblivious to the traps that lay in wait. The first explosion rocked the clearing, sending a plume of dirt and debris into the air. Shouts of confusion followed, and the sound of men scrambling for cover echoed through the night. Lila glanced back, her heart pounding in her chest as she saw flashes of light and heard the chaos unfolding. "Ethan set those traps," she murmured, more to herself than anyone. "He knew they'd come." Clara nodded, pulling her behind a large boulder for cover. "And he knew exactly how to slow them down. Stay close to Hunter." "Lila, we're almost there." Hunter's sharp bark pulled them back into action. The dog sprinted through the clearing, maneuvering around fallen branches and sharp rocks with ease. Lila followed, her legs aching but her mind focused on the map's instructions. Every step Hunter took brought them closer to the second safe house, and closer to safety. The terrain grew steeper as they approached the base of a small hill. Hunter stopped at a narrow crevice, sniffing the air. Lila squeezed past him and pushed open a concealed door hidden in the rocks. The entrance led to an underground shelter, barely visible from the outside. "Inside now," Clara urged, covering their entrance. As they disappeared into the shelter, the door closed behind them, sealing off the noise of the battle outside. Lila collapsed against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The small space was cluttered with crates, emergency supplies, and a series of monitors displaying grainy footage of the surrounding area. Hunter stood guard at the door, his eyes fixed on the small screen that showed figures moving around the perimeter. Clara quickly assessed their surroundings. "This is it," she said. "Safe House Bravo. We're not leaving until we find what we came for." Lila unzipped her backpack, pulling out Ethan's letter. She scanned the instructions, her hands trembling. There should be another cache here, a hard drive with recordings and encrypted files. It's the last piece of evidence. Hunter barked, alerting them to movement outside. The monitors flickered as shadows moved closer to the entrance. Clara cursed under her breath, her hand tightening around the pistol. Outside, Victor Kane prowled through the clearing, his face twisted in anger. His men were scattered, disoriented from the traps, but he was determined not to let the family slip away. "Find them," he shouted, his voice laced with fury. "I want that evidence." Inside the safe house, Lila searched the crates frantically, tossing aside old equipment and boxes. Her fingers brushed against a small metal case tucked beneath a pile of dusty tarps. She pulled it out and opened it, revealing a hard drive marked Bravo cache. "This is it," she said, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. "This is what they're after." Clara took the drive from her and pocketed it. "Now we just need to get out of here." Hunter let out a low growl, his eyes focused on the entrance. The sound of footsteps grew louder, and the door shuddered under the force of a heavy impact. Clara braced herself, her jaw set as she aimed at the door. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air, mingling with the chaos outside. The door burst open, and Victor Kane staggered in, his face a mask of rage, only to be met by a flash of light and the unmistakable sound of approaching police vehicles. "Freeze! Police!" a voice shouted, and the room filled with the blinding lights of flashlights and laser sights. Detective Harper appeared behind Victor, his gun trained on the cartel leader. "It's over, Kane," Harper said, stepping forward. "Drop your weapon." Victor's eyes flickered with desperation, but he knew he was beaten. He dropped the gun with a clatter, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Clara lowered her weapon, relief flooding her features. Lila hugged Hunter, who nuzzled her in return, his body finally relaxing as the danger passed. Harper approached, nodding at Clara. "Good work, all of you," he said, glancing at the evidence they had recovered. "This will take them down for good." Lila exhaled slowly, leaning against the wall. "It's finally over," she whispered. Hunter barked softly, as if to agree. Valley was a far cry from the chaos they'd left behind in Arizona. Rolling green hills stretched endlessly beneath a clear blue sky, the serenity of the landscape wrapping around Lila and Clara like a warm embrace. Their new home was simple, a cozy cabin nestled at the edge of a forest, with just enough land for Hunter to roam freely. Lila sat on the porch steps, Ethan's final letter in her hands. She had read it a dozen times, but the words still struck her deeply. "You're stronger than you think, Lila. Trust Hunter. And trust yourself. I'll always be proud of you." She folded the letter carefully, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Inside the cabin, Clara placed a framed photo of Ethan on the mantel. She paused, recalling the last conversation she'd had with him. "No matter what happens, this family will endure," he had said with quiet certainty. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't of sorrow, they were of gratitude. Hunter lay at Lila's feet, his head resting on his paws. His alert eyes scanned the horizon, ever watchful. But his demeanor was calm. Some guardians never truly rest, and that was just fine by him. Hunter lies at Lila's feet, his watchful eyes scanning the peaceful Montana valley. Clara places Ethan's letter on the mantel, his words still echoing, "No matter what happens, this family will endure." What would you sacrifice to protect your family? Share your thoughts in this story with others. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.